Good evening, students. Welcome to today's Analyst. This is 19th of August 2023, and we are here to discuss important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now, the handouts for this session are there in the description box. You can download them to streamline your current affairs preparation. Now, let us see the table of contents. First topic which we are going to discuss today is in relation to the healthcare sector in India. Second topic is related to GDP, that is your gross domestic product, and how it is a flawed measure to calculate or to estimate the well-being of a country. Third topic is India-Japan tech diplomacy. Fourth topic is related to credit rating agencies. And the last topic is 3D printing. So all these topics we are going to discuss in very much detail. Coming to the first topic of today, it's related to innovation in healthcare and overall healthcare sector of our country. Now, why it is important for our syllabus, for our GS paper 2, issues related to development and management of social sector relating to health has been mentioned. So, pertaining to your general studies paper 2, this topic becomes important. Now, what is the context of this topic? See, first of all, our Prime Minister has recently remarked that innovations in healthcare must be for public good. And in the upcoming G20 summit as well, healthcare is one of the top priorities for our country. And we'll be focusing on healthcare becoming a global good for all the countries in general, which is why we need to understand how the healthcare sector in India is and how it is performing. Right? Now, coming to the initial and very basic facts, we first of all know that healthcare expenditure in our country is only 2.1% of our gross domestic product. So the public expenditure on healthcare is close to 2.1% of our GDP. And if we see the infographic over here, it is pertaining to your year 2018. In 2018 and 19, only 1.29% of the GDP was the public expenditure on healthcare. And when we compare it to various other countries, in Japan, it is close to 9.2%. In Brazil, it is close to 3.9%. In China, it was 2.9%. And in US, it was 14.3%. Which means that in various countries around the world, the proportion spent on healthcare vis-a-vis your overall GDP was much, much higher than that of India. Now, that is one fact. Now, medical tourism market in our country, it's close to $5 to $6 billion. So, which means that medical tourism market also in our country is having a huge potential. And as you all know, India is also called the pharmacy of the world, which means that healthcare sector in our country is given very much importance, and it is important for us to understand that what are the various challenges our healthcare sector is facing. So first set of challenges, let us understand them all. First is pertaining to your accessibility. So even though healthcare centers are there, but are they accessible to all? The answer is no. Because many times poor people are not able to access or not able to avail good healthcare facilities. For them, getting a treatment in the government hospitals, it is easy. But in order to get better treatment in the private hospitals, they do not have the access for that because of lack of resources. So lack of accessibility is one of the challenges in our healthcare sector. Second is pertaining to funding. Now, since less proportion of the GDP is spent on the overall healthcare sector in our country, which is why funding to the government healthcare institutions is also very, very less. That is also one of the problem. Third is preventive care. Now, there are two types of cares. One is preventive, one is curative. But in our country, preventive care yet is not given very much importance, right? So that a person should not feel sick or a person should not fall ill. In order to prevent that illness, certain steps, certain remedial measures needs to be taken. But that extent is not there in our country. So preventive care wise, it is also a challenge to our healthcare sector. Fourth is related to your medical workforce. Now the proportion of nurses to our overall population, the proportion to our paramedics staff compared to the overall population, and the proportion of even doctors to our overall population is very, very less. And it's very less when we compare it to the WHO norms or the WHO standards which have been given to the countries. Again, because of that, there is a problem of lack of skilled medical workforce in our country. And as always, infrastructural issues are there. Even if government hospitals are built, in many of the hospitals, sometimes machines are not working properly, certain times equipments are not there, many times doctors are not present, many times even the buildings which are there, they are not constructed well, right? So infrastructural problems are there, and in many places, in many rural areas, primary healthcare centers are there, but advanced healthcare facilities are not present. So infrastructure wise also, our healthcare sector is lacking somewhere. Then insurance penetration. So healthcare insurance penetration in our country, again, it is very, very low, which is also a challenge our healthcare sector is facing. Now, policy making. Now, because of delayed policy making, because of policy making not aligning to the grassroots, not aligning to the realities of what is present in the ground situation, because of that, our policy making is somewhat lacking as we compare it to the other sectors. So policy making in healthcare sector is not that sound, it is not that fine, which is also one of the challenge of this sector. And medical research. Now in our country, there is very less focus given to our research and development. And particularly if we talk about medical research and development, a very minuscule focus is given to it. Again, which is why it is a challenge to our overall healthcare ecosystem and healthcare sector. Plus, less number of innovations, low innovations. Because of low medical research, obviously, the level of innovations in our healthcare sector, new practices to treat various ailments, to treat various diseases, that innovation is somewhat lacking in our country. So all these are the various challenges, but we should also know what are the various potential factors of healthcare sector in our country. See, first is that because our population is very high, so demand of healthcare in our country is also very high. So there is an urgent need to overhaul the healthcare sector and to make it more robust, more efficient, and more effective. Plus, technology wise also, there is a lot of potential and there is a lot of room for improvement for our country. And if we particularly talk about cost, since medical insurance or since medical cost in our country is very, very low, because of that, there is increased medical tourism in our country. So people are coming into our country from other countries just to treat their ailments, just to get the treatment for their diseases. Because the medical cost in India is substantially lower when we compare it to various other European countries, various other Western countries. So this shows you that healthcare sector in India is having a lot of potential, but the need is to ensure careful policy making and careful planning when we come to our healthcare sector. What are the various government measures which have already been introduced? One is your National Health Mission. By combining your National Rural Health Mission, National Urban Health Mission, that has been launched by the government. Then PM Jan Arogya Yojana, Ayushman Bharat, covering approximately most of the poor people in our country and giving them close to 5 lakh insurance coverage to the families, poor families of our country. Then creation of your National Medical Commission, in order to ensure that medical education in our country, it becomes very, very qualitative, and to ensure overall of the medical education system in our country. So National Medical Commission has been created by removing this Medical Council of India, and NMC have been created. Then your Ayush Ministry and Ayush Mission is also there, National Ayush Mission, which is there to promote your Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddhi, and homeopathy, right? So in all these spheres also, our healthcare sector is getting promoted and our healthcare sector is being uplifted by the government. Now, coming to the second topic of today, it is related to the issue of GDP of India and its relation with the well-being of our people. Now, why this issue is important? Because if we see our GS paper 3, Indian economy and issues relating to it has been mentioned. And GDP is a very important part of our Indian economy, which is why it becomes important. Now, what is the context? See, the context is that the headline grabbing GDP figures, that 7% growth rate or double-digit growth rate, it is being questioned by various researchers that is it the right measure to estimate the well-being of a country or not. So in that respect, we'll be considering GDP as a flawed measure of well-being. We'll be understanding how GDP is a flawed measure of well-being. Now, the first question that arises into our mind is, what is GDP? What is gross domestic product? So let us understand that. See, gross domestic product, the basic economic definition of it is that GDP is the final value. Let me just write it down. It is the final value of all the goods and services being produced in a country in a particular financial year. So it's the final value of goods and services being produced by the country in a financial year, right? So GDP is giving us the value of what? It is giving us the value of goods and services. Now let us understand how it is a flawed measure to measure the well-being of a country. Now, we have to understand well-being is not only measured by understanding the value of goods and services. Well-being also involves your happiness. Well-being also involves the happiness of the overall happiness of the people in the country, satisfaction of people in the country, the level of education, the level of healthcare, the level of human development. So there are various other spheres, various other dimensions which we have to consider when we talk about well-being. We also have to talk about the standard of living of the poor, how the poor people are living in the country, right? And how a person who is earning a very minuscule salary, how they are able to meet their ends. So well-being involves a wide canvas and a wide range of things. But is GDP able to calculate what is human well-being? Is GDP able to estimate the well-being of an overall nation? The answer is no. Because GDP is just an economic criterion which tells us what is the level of economic activity in our country, right? So GDP tells us the level of economic activity in our country. But well-being, obviously, it is somewhat associated with economic activity, but not wholly and not substantially, right? Somewhat economic activities leads to well-being, but well-being is having various other factors as well. But all those factors GDP fails to inculcate. So let us see it point-wise point. See, the first point is distribution of GDP. Now, once we calculate GDP, we usually don't calculate in GDP that how it is distributed. How much proportion to the GDP is contributed by how much percentage of people. For example, 1% of our overall population in our country is holding more than 50% of our national wealth, right? Which means that distribution of GDP is very, very skewed. Because of that, there is income inequality as well. There is wealth inequality as well. But GDP fails to consider these factors. GDP just tells us that, okay, this is the overall economic performance of the country. But well-being is also associated with the issue of inequality. So GDP is not a measure of well-being. Plus the composition of GDP. Now, sometimes what might happen that GDP might rise because of increase in government expenditure on capital goods, or let's say increase in government expenditure on infrastructure, right? Now, when government is spending more on infrastructure, is it ultimately doing any good to the poor people? Obviously, trickle-down effect would be there. Obviously, multiplier effect would be there. But is the poor directly getting any benefit out of that infrastructure? A person who is not even having food to eat, a person who is not even having shelter, is that person getting any benefit out of that government expenditure on infrastructure? The answer is no. So because of that, the composition of GDP also needs to be seen. But GDP also does not take that into consideration. So again, GDP is not a good measure for well-being. Non-monetary exchanges. Now, still in our country, there are many places, many tribal areas, many remote areas where non-monetary exchanges takes place. Kind of barter system, right? But they are not included, or they are not a part of our GDP. Again, because of that, it fails to measure the well-being. Plus the externalities. Now, externalities means that any external effect which is impacting you, or any external thing which is impacting you. For example, your neighbor's garden. Now, there is a lot of smell in your neighbor's garden. It is ultimately impacting your well being. So, for you, it is an externality. It is a negative externality. Now, in the case of the whole society, let's say pollution. Now, pollution is impacting the overall standard of living of our people in our country, right? So, it is impacting the standard of living. It is also impacting people's well being. But is GDP considering that externality? No, GDP is not considering that externality. So, it is not a measure of our well being. Happiness and well being. Now, GDP also does not take into consideration how much people are happy in that country. Even though GDP of China is very, very high, but are people really happy? Is the well-being of the people ensured? Is the standard of living increased? Is the quality of life in any country or in that country, has that increased? GDP does not have answers to all these questions. So all in all, GDP is obviously a very good way to calculate the economic activity, to understand the economic activity. But in order to understand the overall well-being of a nation, overall well-being of a country, we need to take into consideration various multitude factors as well, which GDP fails to inculcate. I hope you got this topic. Now, coming to the next topic of today, it is related to India-Japan technological diplomacy. That is India-Japan tech diplomacy. Now, pertaining to our general studies paper 2, bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India and affecting India's interest. In relation to that, this topic becomes very, very important. Now, what is the context? See, India and Japan has recently agreed to create more resilient supply chains. So in relation to that, India-Japan tech diplomacy is there in news. Now we have to understand that relationship between India and Japan is very, very close. We both are very deep partners. We are both very good friends, and we are both strategic partners as well. But recently what has been done is that in the month of July, we collaborated on semiconductors. So we had an agreement whereby we will be collaborating, both the countries will be collaborating on manufacturing of semiconductors. And then 4 spheres will be collaborating. First is the design of semiconductors. Second is manufacturing. Third is research based on semiconductors. Fourth is resilience. And the main aim of this collaboration is to ensure we improve, or we make our supply chains more resilient. So in order to make supply chains resilient, in order to improve the level of supply chains, this collaboration would be happening. In that, technology transfer would also be there. Japan would be transferring some of its technologies to our country, and it would be aligning to our country's Make in India vision, and it would be aligning to Japan's Society 5.0 vision. So Japan is having that 5.0, Society 5.0 vision. So this collaboration will be directly inclined towards these visions of both the countries. Now, Japan is having competitive advantage in what? It is having competitive advantage in chip manufacturing, in research. Now, India is having advantage in your IT sector, because of India's huge population base. Because of that, India's demand of semiconductors is very high. So that respect, India can collaborate. With respect to innovation and with respect to design, India is having an advantage. So both the countries would complement each other in various aspects in order to collaborate on manufacturing, design, research, and resilience of semiconductors. Now, in relation to your Indo-Pacific supply chain, because both the countries are integral part of Indo-Pacific, so Indo-Pacific supply chain resilience is also a very important way, or it's also a very important factor which we need to consider when we talk about the collaboration in relation to semiconductors. Now, we will be having skill exchange among both the countries. We'll be having regular workshops, skill-based workshops, and regular training sessions for people from both the countries. And we all know, since India, US, Japan form the part of a security dialogue or a security grouping, which you call as Quad, because of that also, this India and Japan collaboration on semiconductors becomes very important, because US is also a very big player when it comes to your semiconductor manufacturing. So if all these countries collaborate together, India can leverage this position in a very better manner. Right? And also China's expanding its capabilities, that is also a cause of concern for both Japan and India, because both are having some or the other issues with China, some of the other issues with the policies of China. China's policy in the Indo-Pacific region, they are also against the interests of India and Japan both. So because of that, we need to counter China when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing as well. Now, since both the countries are also part of your SCRI, that is your supply chain resilience initiative, whereby India, Japan, and Australia are a part of it, it will strengthen this SCRI even more. Because what was the main purpose of the semiconductor collaboration? To ensure your resilience in supply chain management in both the countries. So ultimately, SCRI between both the countries, SCRI collaboration will also strengthen. I hope you understood this. Now, coming to the fourth topic of today, it is in relation to Moody's bullish on growth. Now, why this credit rating agency Moody's is important? Because in our GS paper 3, Indian economy and issues relating to it have been mentioned. So this issue of credit rating agencies and various rating agencies throughout the world, it is related to your GS paper 3 Indian economy. Now, what is the context? See, Moody's credit rating agency is having a bullish stance on India's growth. And it has also flagged various sectarian tensions and also a curb on dissent. So with that respect, we first of all need to understand what are these rating agencies. See, rating agencies are basically various companies or various agencies which, by measuring the credit worthiness of a country and by measuring the risk level of investments in that country and the overall economic performance of that country, they give various ratings to that particular country, right? And on the basis of that rating, investors decide that should we invest in that country or not. So it impacts our investors' confidence. It also impacts that how much FDI a country will get. Because if a country is getting negative ratings by all the credit rating agencies, that means investors' confidence will be very, very low. And FDI in that country is bound to decrease. So credit rating agencies help in that level as well. It also impacts your debt level risk, and it also have impact on your bond yield and your interest rates. So overall, in all these spheres, credit rating agencies will have an impact. Also, if we talk about an economic survey, in an economic survey, it has been mentioned that never in the economic history of this world, fifth largest economy in the world has been rated BBB. See, there are various rating standards which includes AAA, AAA plus, AAA minus, BBB. So India has been rated BBB minus. And never in history of the world, fifth largest economy in the world has been rated BBB, except China and India, which again shows us that there is somewhat bias against the Asian growing economies, against the Asian developing economies, vis-a-vis the credit rating agencies. So economic survey clearly says that these ratings seems biased and they are way below our expectations. Why? What is the reason for that? Because first of all, we are having sizable foreign exchange reserves. It is hovering around $600 billion. Also, we are having low foreign currency denominated debt. So the debt which we have taken also, very small percentage of it is based on foreign currency denomination, which again means that our risk or the risk of India defaulting on its credit payment is very, very low and even close to zero. But still, these credit rating agencies have rated India poorly, which is a cause of concern for us, right? So, India is having basically 6 credit rating agencies which are registered under your SEBI, Security Exchange Board of India. One is your CRISIL, one is ICRA ICRA, one is CARE, one is SMERA, one is Fitch India. And if we talk about popular international credit rating agencies, first of all, it is Fitch. Second, it is Moody's. And third, it is Standard and Poor S&P. I hope this credit rating agencies topic is also very clear to all of you. Now, coming to the last topic of today, it is related to the 3D printing in our country. Right? Why it is important? Again, for our GS paper 3, awareness in the field of IT, awareness in the field of space, computer, robotics and nanotechnology. In relation to that, this 3D printing becomes very, very important. Now, if we see the context, India has recently set up its first 3D printing post office, right? And in that respect, the first question that should arise in our mind is, what is this 3D printing? So what do you mean by 3D printing? That is the first question we will be addressing. See, 3D printing, it got invented in the 1980s and it pertinently became popular in around 2010. Now, it is also known as additive manufacturing. And in this 3D printing, what happens is three-dimensional objects or products gets created. So digital models use various technologies to print a three-dimensional model. That is, for example, this pen. So 3D printer would be able to print this pen. The same size, the same volume, the same dimensions of this pen can be recreated using a 3D printer. So a printer which prints three-dimensional objects which you can see, which you can touch, which you can hold. Those objects, if a printer is able to print, that technology is what you call as 3D printing. And various materials, including your plastic, including composites, including various biomaterials also, can be used to construct these objects. And they can range between various shapes, various sizes, various rigidities, and various colors. Right? So in all these spheres, this 3D printing can happen. Now, if we see the infographic, the cost of printers is hovering close to $450 to $3,000. Right? So one thing is that 3D printing is very, very pricey. That is, the cost of 3D printing is very, very high. What are the materials we already saw, but let us see the proportion. See, plastics are used for 67% of the time. Human tissues are used for 53% of the time. Edible food is used for 33% and glass is used for 48% of the time. And how does 3D printing work? See, first of all, scanning of the model, scanning of the object, it takes place. Then a software is used by the 3D printer. Then we choose the material with which we want to print that particular 3D object, and ultimately printing happens where a three-dimensional project it gets created, or a three-dimensional object it gets created. I hope you got it. Now, what is the requirement for 3D printers? See, first of all, you require a personal computer, that is a PC, which should be connected with a 3D printer. Plus, you will require a software, that is your computer aid design, which we call as CAD software. Now, it is a special software specially designed for your 3D printing only. So that software you require, plus the hardware of a 3D printer and your personal computer. And what are the various industries where this 3D printing is being used? First is obviously the automotive industry. Second is your automotive industry. Second is your medical industry. Then food and beverages. Then your fashion industry and architecture as well. Now, there has been news as well, news items as well, that using this 3D technology, using this 3D printing, even houses have been created. So such huge volume or such huge level of 3D printer has been manufactured, has been made, which can even create houses as well. Because you have to understand, this 3D printer makes products or makes objects as it is in 3 dimension, which we can touch, which we can feel, exactly the same object. Let's say you want to print a car. So same if you want to print a plastic car, and if you choose the material as plastic, and if you scan a very small car, if the printer is small, then you will be getting a small toy car out of that printer. So layer by layer, adding layer by layer into that printing process, this 3D printing is able to happen and is able to take place. I hope you got this 3D printing process in detail. Thank you very much for watching this lecture. I hope it was fruitful for you and I hope you understood something. All the very best to all of you and have a nice day.